there's one thing I've learned in my journalism career, it's that you really want to work with good editors and smart people who know how to pursue the most interesting stories. And ultimately, that's the thing that I kind of search for the most. So, I was really flattered when Ben asked me to do the job, and it's been really exciting to kind of be a part of a new media launch.
Welcome back to Media Voices, our 250th episode. And this is where I'm going to put in all the celebration sound effects. Fireworks, corks popping, all this kind of stuff. Congratulations to the two of you for making it to 250 episodes. I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston. And that extract you just heard is from my interview with Max Tani, a media reporter at news startup Semafor. We spoke about how he came to Semafor, working with smart people, which I have some experience of.
Thank you.
I love how you just jumped on that. The Venn diagram between media, politics, Hollywood, and pretty much everything else in life, which we're about to find out. And Semafor's attempts to balance out news and opinion, the role of newsletters, and my favourite bit of the interview was whether covering the White House was actually anything like the TV show The West Wing. That was fun.
Very nice. Well, speaking of political debacles and the interplay between broadcasters and the political engine that fuels them, we're going to be talking about what has been a bad week for broadcasters. And it's important to flag up at this point that everything we're talking about is still developing. So by the time this goes out on Monday, this could all be out of date because we are recording this on the Saturday.
It won't be.
How long ago does Isabel Oakeshott feel, though?
But you're breaking a massive promise, Chris. You said we were going to get back to boring, old, nuts and bolts media stuff.
We are, because regardless of how this plays out over the next 2 days before this goes out, we're going to be talking about every single bit of this from a trust point of view. So we are, even though we're going to be talking about a developing story, we're going to bring it back to our nuts and bolts.
Bring it back.
So,
Bring it all back to you.
Esther, where do we even start with this? Do you want to take us through, I suppose, a quick
We say that every
timeline?
week. Where do we even start?
So Gary Lineker, who, for those that are not in the UK, he's presented the BBC's football programme Match of the Day since, the 90s?
He was the face of Walker's Crisps in the UK for many years as well.
He's been, quote, taken off hosting duties after tweeting that the language the UK government was using to describe stopping the migrant boats was not dissimilar to that used by 1930s Germany. That's a policy the UK government are trying to get through at the moment that is, I think we can probably all agree, is pretty horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Lineker is stepping back until an agreed and clear position on his social media use is made, which is a statement the BBC said on Friday. This has prompted all the other hosts that would normally host Match of the Day to pull out and say that they're not taking part in Saturday's show in solidarity. It's not just the presenters, like a lot of commenters and even teams are actually still deciding whether they're going to basically boycott it in solidarity.
Just before we started recording, Bristol Rovers confirmed that they are not going to be talking to the BBC before or after. This is a seismic reaction. This isn't sort of like a storm in a teacup. This is now spilling out beyond the bounds of media commentary and into the realms of public consciousness, which is where we can talk about trust. There are questions here about whether there is rank hypocrisy going on with the BBC and its position on this. Now, why is that?
Because other people are allowed to say stuff, but because it's not necessarily against the government position, no one says a word. Andrew Neil said stuff, Lord Sugar said stuff. So there's this accusation of double standards that as long as you take the establishment line, you're okay to do what you want on social media or otherwise. But if you take it
is complicated. So I think there's the kind of the background is that BBC News has got quite strict impartiality rules. Their journalists have got to be very, very careful about the political opinions they put across. They can't sort of say either way. But Lineker's in quite an interesting position because he's contracted by the BBC, but he also works for a number of other media orgs. He's basically a freelancer for them. But he also, I didn't realise, he apparently signed a 5-year deal with the BBC in 2020 where he said he would adhere to their impartiality rules.
He gets paid a lot of money.
Oh, he gets paid it's like 1.3 million to work for them. And as part of that clause, he had to avoid bringing the BBC into disrepute. So although there's a lot of people saying, well, if he tweeted in support of this migration policy, they wouldn't come down on him.
BBC into disrepute. So I was listening to radio this morning in the car, and there was a clause in there. I don't know the wording of the clause, but it basically says that if you're a politics reporter, you can't be biased in politics. Fair enough. But if you're a sports reporter, it doesn't actually cover that. You can have an opinion. So it's not black and white in that sense.
Well, it would also, surely Andrew Neil, for instance, would have fallen under that remit because he was a politics reporter and he was editor of the very right-leaning title The Spectator for the duration of his tenure at the BBC. Now, that's GB News' Andrew Neil, lest we forget. That's GB News' Andrew Neil, previous chairman of GB News, Andrew Neil.
The biggest issue here is that this has completely overtaken the root of the issue, which is that the government has put out a horrendous migration policy.
That is absolutely the point. And if you see the people, I mean, Chris has correct me on this. I thought this was the first time Armando Iannucci had been mentioned on the podcast.
No, we've quoted Day Today before.
He said a lot of tropes used by the government, invasion, menace, whatever, are similar to those used by nationalist parties in the 1930s. Germany, Janine Graham at Big Issue says invasion, swarm, hostile environment. I think the problem with that is Godwin's law, right? Which is that the longer a debate goes on, the more likely Hitler is to get brought up, or the Nazis or fascists or whatever. And the problem with that is the debate just falls apart at that point.
There is an additional point here, because when you were saying that, I can remember an awful lot of those words being used on the front pages of British newspapers during the migrant crisis in 2016. It was a lot of papers without the government intervention that were using words like, we're about to be invaded, there's a swarm coming, on their front pages.
I believe was thrown around by a couple of people. I mean,
yes, the government language is horrendous here, but my goodness me, we've been dealing with this in this country for at least the last decade.
And the point is, as both of you have made clear here, that the reaction to Lineker's tweet has masked that. It has taken over. It's become the story in and of itself. And there was I'm going to read out a tweet here from the new head of the Bureau Local, Gareth Davis, who says, so he got a BBC breaking news alert. And Gareth said, so actually it's a BBC news alert about a BBC story about a former BBC director's take on how the BBC caused a crisis on a BBC show by taking a BBC presenter off air. So we're no longer now talking about the government and its inhumane response to small boats. We're talking about the BBC, and that is undermining trust in the BBC. And I don't know, not to get all tinfoil hat, that is entirely accidental.
No, it's not. It's giving them cover to talk about something. I mean, you know what? The boats thing in the first place, that's just Britain's version of Trump's wall. They're risking their lives, and what are we doing? We're
saying if you come here, we're going to ignore the fact that you're being sort of enslaved, and you don't get access to any of our modern slavery laws and protections.
It's absolute bullshit. But you're right, Chris, and what Charlotte Henry put this perfectly in the edition. She says Gary Lineker is not the story. The focus on Gary Lineker is a failure, say that again, a failure by certain outlets. And for her, she says it's time to lead on the real story.
See, this is the thing, we could get really
I'm just off to bang my head against the wall here, okay?
This is why I'm trying to keep it so focused on the media side, because we could get so pissed off about this. I thought that this whole dehumanization of migrants and refugees would have ended with the death of Alan Kurdi years ago, when his dead body was put on the front pages of papers. But no, that seems to have forgotten, and that is infuriating. But the reality here, I think, is we were talking about it as being a mask there, is one of trust in the BBC, which has been beleaguered now for years. But I do think it's important that we separate out the people who are responsible for this crisis at the BBC from the BBC itself. I've seen so many people denigrate it as a whole and say, it's not fit for purpose. Parts of the BBC World Service, parts of BBC News do a fantastic and very vital job. And when we tar it with this brush of being completely unreliable, we're actually playing into the hands of the people who want to see it denigrated. We shouldn't be mad at the BBC. Not that there is such a thing. It's so monolithic you can't really talk about it as such. We should be mad at this fruity little cabal of Tory adjacent people parachuted in by the Conservative government who are doing their best to run it into the ground. They are between a bit of a rock and a hard place with this, because they if they enforce a policy, they need to enforce it consistently. Yeah. And well, then Richard Sharp, chairman, is going to be out on his arse straight away, which I mean, potentially he will be, because he facilitated an £800,000 loan for Boris Johnson and didn't declare it when he was going for the job. Regardless of what you think of, I suppose, them as individuals, I think we can all agree that Tim Davie, Director General, has made an arse of this entire thing. Where does the buck stop? That is such a dereliction of duty on his part.
And to be honest, this could have all changed a lot in the next 48 hours before the episode goes out. So
listen, I will see you. I will see you both back here. I'll see you both back here at 8 p.m. on Sunday night to re-record an episode when this has all been settled. But listen, Esther, you pointed out that there's a very nice segue from that talk and trusting the BBC to what's going on in Fox News.
So Fox News has found itself embroiled in a $1.6 billion defamation case brought against it by voting machine company Dominion Voting Systems. So when the 2020... when Biden defeated Trump in 2020 and the Capitol riots happened, Fox News was basically saying, oh, well, there's probably an error with the voting systems. Like, they've not counted loads of Trump votes. So the voting company has just brought this lawsuit up and been like, you can't say that and like get away with saying it. And as part of that lawsuit, all these messages have come out from top Fox News execs, Rupert Murdoch, all that lot. And all these top hosts, including people like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, have been making these really derogatory comments about Trump behind the scenes, saying that they absolutely hate him, they can't stand him, they think he's lying. But then they'll go on air and reinforce the falsehoods and reinforce what he was saying.
Well, why were they doing that? Because some of the messages have provided a motivation for why they've been doing that, which actually does have a media business model angle.
Yeah, and they've all just sat there and said, well, we can't not put out that we believe Trump because otherwise our viewers are going to leave us for networks that are supporting him.
What's his culture
was? Goodness me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Peter, you were shaking your head quite vigorously there. Now, which of the many thousands of angles you can take here are you going to grab?
Well, what you just said a minute ago, it's culture wars as a business model. And that's part of it's not the BBC, but part of the problem in the UK is that our press is engaging in that. And then Fox News has definitely been engaging in that, and OAN and all these other ones. And it's got to somehow, somewhere, someone has got to stop this outrage engine.
I just want to read this statement here from the Harvard law professor Lawrence H. Tribe, which is fantastic. He says,
that's a great name.
He says, I have never seen a defamation case with such overwhelming proof that the defendant admitted in writing that it was making up fake information in order to increase its viewership and its revenues. Fox and its producers and performers were lying as part of their business model.
But Fox were trying to wriggle out of it by saying, "Oh, we're not a news channel, we're an entertainment channel."
Jesus whipped.
Which yeah. I think just
I'm
says
just
it
off
all.
to bang my head on the wall again. Sorry.
I actually hope that there's enough evidence here that they actually get nailed on this.
Oh, does that contravene our impartiality policy that you want Fox?
Well, this is why I thought the contrast was so interesting, because you've got the BBC that's like impartiality at all costs, and then you've got Fox News just on the flip side that's like, oh no, this isn't news, this is entertainment.
Peter, we're all freelancers for Media Voices. We can say what we want. Hey, and speaking of millions of pounds,
nice segue.
GB News, which we have spoken about endlessly over the past 2 years because of its challenger status within the news market in the UK, and also because of its many, many controversies. So the broadcast has reported losses 10 times greater than revenue for its first year on air.
Oh, that's a shame.
It made total revenues of around 3.5 million against a £31 million loss. It's been struggling to find an audience. Its average monthly reach is 2.32 million. And if you remember a couple of months ago, that was basically concentrated around a couple of flagship programs. So, Esther, you've pointed out, I think that, to be fair, this is its first year and few news organisations actually rise to profit that quickly.
As funny as this is, because GB News is, how would you politely describe them for people who aren't in the UK?
Absolute
not a Fox News level, but they're sort of aspiring
I was
to be
going
that
to say
kind of
that
level.
it's Fox News Light.
Yeah, it is only year one. Very few media organisations are profitable that quickly. You could pick out all sorts of examples of startups that have got a 5-year plan to be profitable. So they are apparently going much heavier into their digital presence.
What, GB News?
Yeah.
Well, they already say that all the views are online, right? They've been very heavy on, oh, you're not counting our YouTube views, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Why do we have to talk about this crap? It just makes me feel like an old guy shouting at clouds. It annoys the crap out of me.
Welcome to Media Voices 250th episode, everybody. And now on to news in brief, very brief. And there's a fascinating piece on TechCrunch this week about Artifact, which is a new news aggregator from Instagram co-founder Kevin Systrom. Now, we don't have time here to go into the specifics of it, but I was struck by the language that he's using to describe the news ecosystem. He's saying it's broken, quote unquote, biased.
What's he been listening to this episode?
Which is exactly the language we heard ahead of launch from aggregators like News. You remember News?
That.
Yeah, News Corp's ill-fated aggregator, which was supposed to be non-biased and then ended up being the most biased of all. So it's interesting that is still the perception of news aggregation online. So we'll keep an eye on that.
There's a great piece this week in the Wrap about how Vice, Vox and BuzzFeed blew the future of media. I mean, it's interesting. It touches on BuzzFeed's share price collapse, Vice's $30 million in debt, departure of Nancy DeWick, Vox fire sale, all the things that we know about that's going wrong with these organisations. But I think what's really comes through is that their problem was, VC funding based on over-promising and under-delivering. And it was just really interesting to read that in the context of this week of our biggest newspaper publishing group, Reach, in the UK, announcing a 27% drop in operating profit. But you're still seeing them saying, we're building on our digital foundations and customer value and data, and the future is bright. And it's like, guys, let's talk honestly about this stuff. So
don't put all your money of your Vox in Silicon Valley Bank.
Oh yeah. Oh God, we could talk about that again for another 4 hours.
Okay. I mean, as you may have gathered from this episode, there was a lot of media news this week. But my favourite was actually an announcement about the launch of a new climate media company called Heatmap News. So it's co-founded by a team of former The Week executives, including former editor-in-chief Nika Loricella, North American CEO Randy Siegel, and CEO Sarah O'Connor. So the startup has raised $4 million in a Series A funding round and is actually starting, I thought it was really interesting, by focusing exclusively on selling consumer subscriptions. So I thought it was a great mission, great launch. And yeah, good luck to them.
Fantastic. And I just want to end this news roundup on a fantastic tweet that I've just seen. So Charlotte Colombo has said, eating nothing but Walker's crisps for the next 24 hours in solidarity with Gary Lineker.
This week I spoke to Semafor's media reporter Max Tani. I asked him about covering media and politics, about the Semafor story format, but first I asked Max how he came to be at Semafor.
I was previously a reporter with Politico as a part of our Politico's White House team. I wrote a daily newsletter on the Biden administration called West Wing Playbook. We really focused a lot on Biden and the media and his relationship with the media. And I've kind of, even though that was a political reporting job, we found that people were really, really interested in stories about the relationship between Biden and the press, and how the press covers the president. Before that, I was a media reporter. That was my background at the Daily Beast. Where I covered a lot of stuff about New York media, New York, and of course the relationship between Donald Trump and the media, which is obviously one of the more interesting storylines of the previous administration. So I've really been focused on media coverage, the relationships between prominent, primarily American political media figures and the press, and so when I got the opportunity to join Semafor as a media reporter, I thought it was really exciting because, Ben Smith obviously was who's one of the co-founders and the editor-in-chief, was a tremendous media columnist at the New York Times. And, if there's one thing I've learned in my journalism career, it's that you really want to work with good editors and smart people who know how to pursue the most interesting stories. And ultimately, that's the thing that I kind of search for the most. So, I was really flattered when Ben asked me to do the job, and it's been really exciting to kind of be a part of a new media launch.
I love that idea. I always try and work with people that are smarter.
Yep.
At least in some ways smarter than you are. I love that. I've got a question for you that's got nothing to do with anything other than my own interest. Is The West Wing anything like the TV show The West Wing?
I think that it is certainly full of really smart, really smart. Particularly, this administration really does have. It's full of a lot of people with decades of political experience, people who have worked in previous Democratic administrations, the Clinton administration and the Obama administration. So it certainly more closely resembles the television show probably than the last administration did. Um, but what I will say is, I feel like the West Wing television show, most of the staffers were young or in their prime or kind of
Yeah.
middle
Yeah.
aged in a way, and were kind of smart at the top of their careers. This White House really is full, particularly at the top, with people who are a little bit older, and obviously he's the oldest president we've ever had, and a lot of the staff are people who've been with him for a long time. So I don't think it's as quippy or as kind of quick, at least in my experience. This White House as well is quite serious. What I found in my time covering them is they didn't have much of a sense of humor about, when we did cute stories about them. I don't know if they necessarily loved that. And so, I found them to be it's a serious adult administration. So, maybe not like full of necessarily the young, arrogant staffers, as you'll kind of see on the West Wing. It's more of kind of seasoned older hands.
Yeah.
So that was my experience. But, definitely there are a few similarities here and there.
I guess I'd say you're smart for wanting to work with smart people, but Ben's obviously hired you because your experience is kind of perfectly pitched for Semafor with that kind of global news idea, but also the media beat. Does that idea that you've covered politics in the past feed into what you're doing in the media side?
Oh, absolutely. I think what Ben and I really agree on is that the most interesting media stories are always kind of yoked or kind of tied to something else, whether it be a media and politics story. So it's a media story that's really a political story, or a media and technology story, or a media and entertainment story. What we found is it really helps to think about media as kind of vehicles for some of these other beats. And that's one of the things that's really fun for me, is that I get to kind of, some days I'm covering political stories, some days I'm covering technology or some, Wall Street stories, and sometimes I get to dabble a little bit in Hollywood as well. So it's really fun to, I really enjoy that element. But I do think it really, really helps to have that political backbone, and particularly, I think one of the things that I've learned as well is, there is just this class of, a few thousand people that kind of seamlessly move between politics and media. People in politics who really their sole job is focusing on media coverage, or, the depictions of, whoever they're working for in the media. So it really helps to know all of those players. And it's really helpful also as a media reporter to have covered, some other topics, so you understand how the reporters and editors on those beats do their job. So I found it to be a really fun and informative experience, getting to spend a lot of time in Washington and cover the White House, which is, a whole different beast. And also, in this administration in particular is a bit different than other previous administrations, obviously, particularly the last one, but it's more different than the Obama administration than people kind of realize. So it is really helpful to have that context.
Going back to Semafor, so Semafor's got this kind of global news idea, but the newsletter strategy for Semafor in particular is really fairly niched down. So, there's the kind of flagship, which is everything, but then you've got the media beat, and then you've got the Africa beat, and the technology beat, and the business beat. It's obviously very deliberate, but is it something that you talk a lot about as to how you can work inside that niche, but also inside Semafor's broader mandate?
Yeah, I think that we are always thinking, part of the founding ethos of this company, and something that we are striving to do is try to have a global focus and not be necessarily so US centric, or even just focused on, just New York and Washington media, which are their own, you could have newsletters, and there are that are just focused on those in particular. So we do try to remember that that part of the reason why we want to exist is to be a global publication. Obviously, we feel the most comfortable. I don't want to speak for others, but for me personally, I feel most comfortable, in U.S. media stories because I understand the landscape really well. But we've had a few Chinese, stories about Chinese media. We've dabbled a little bit in UK media with a little bit of coverage of the Guardian and a little bit of the FT. And obviously we were at Davos. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, I think the thing that unites all of the newsletters is we're trying to balance a few things. We want to be something that insiders and people, in Washington and New York and Hollywood read. But, there are some publications that are content to stop there. And for us, I think everybody on the Semafor team is constantly thinking about what are our global readers interested in? How do we reach them? What are the stories that they're interested in? And how do we make sure that we are covering stories that tap into different, obviously when you say global, when you talk about a global markets, obviously there are very few stories that every single person in the world might be interested in. So we just want to, I think with all of our newsletters, make sure that we are continuing to branch out and not close ourselves off to global media ideas just because maybe they're not the most familiar. It just means that we have to invest more time and effort in reporting them. So I think that's the thing that kind of unites all of our newsletters, the global focus.
Is the media newsletter is weekly? Is that right?
Yeah, every Sunday night, East Coast time. We generally tend to publish somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. on Sunday nights, which I think we like to do because it's a bit of Ben used to publish his New York Times column around then, and it gives us the ability to kind of set the table for the week. And we found that time is particularly resonant for an East Coast audience, and then for people waking up on Monday morning with it in their inbox. I think it can be a fun little treat. It's interesting to see sometimes the newsletters immediately hit and they take off and people are reading them, right after they land in their inbox. But some, like this week's, had a bit of a slower burn and people were started to discover the pieces kind of over the course of the next few days. But yeah, we publish every Sunday night.
How do you find writing for newsletters like that? The idea that people can contact you and comment and they've got a direct line.
I really love writing for a newsletter audience for a few reasons. I think one of the things that's really nice about a newsletter is everybody who is clicking to open the story has opted in, or someone has forwarded it along to them. So there's a level of engagement that's higher than, a few years ago. Most people working in media were probably chasing traffic on Facebook, maybe 5 years ago. And you really had to write for a kind of broad Facebook audience, or something that was going to go that you wanted to go viral, or something like that. And I think that newsletter audiences are really special because they already, presumably they already know a lot about you. They've opted into receiving something from you every week, or bi-weekly, or whatever it might be. So one thing that I really, really love is you do get that immediate impact when things land in the newsletter and then someone texts me, or gives me a call 5 minutes later and they've already read it. To me, that's really, really special. And those people don't have to be on Facebook or on Twitter and they see your story that way. I found that audiences are more engaged in newsletters. The other thing I really like about newsletters too, because I've worked on 2 of them for slightly different audiences, is you can kind of create a bit of a community around the newsletter. There are certain storylines or threads that you can kind of keep going week after week, or, when I was at West Wing Playbook, day after day. And people start to understand the language of the newsletters, the rhythms, what they can expect in it. And so you can kind of create your own little world and little community. And that's just, to me, something that you wouldn't be able to get in an article or something like that. So there's a reason why it's so appealing, I think, to so many reporters and journalists is, having an engaged audience and then being able to kind of create both the dialogue and kind of community through that. So I personally writing for newsletters, it's one of my favorite formats. The only one, I'm sorry, I'm rambling at you, but the only other downside is it's a bit like old school print where, once it's out there, you can't go back and fix typos. If you've messed something up in the newsletter, there's really no going back.
Yeah.
That can be really great because it causes at least me to be even more careful. Your mistakes are there in virtual ink, kind of can't be erased.
So one of the things that Semafor is known for is your new format, the Semaform article. First off, could you explain that to anyone that hasn't heard about it before?
Yes.
What's the format? What's the idea behind it?
Yeah. The format basically, for people who haven't quite seen it yet, most news stories are written in an inverted pyramid style, which is the most important, or these are most daily news stories are written in the kind of inverted pyramid, right? Which is most important information at the top. That's the lead. And then, kind of descending pyramid of context and quotes and whatnot. And what we've tried to do is kind of get ourselves out of that particular format, and also to take advantage of the expertise of our journalists and kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and allow us to strip away the veil of objectivity. So what I mean by that is we'll generally start an article with a section that's just it's titled either the news or the scoop, which basically is reveals the what you need to know. X thing happened. And then after that, we'll have a view from the author section, which is, in my case, it's Max's view. So that allows me to really basically it's exactly what it sounds like, which is the first few graphs will have, the news. The next will be kind of my take on what's kind of going on. And what's really nice about that is it means I don't have to really launder my opinion through the kind of the rest of the B matter, right? Like it's not, you're not saying, oh, this comes as XYZ thing is happening. And really that context doesn't really maybe necessarily have anything to do with the actual news. It's more of my view of how things are playing out, but without explicitly saying it. What we're trying to do with the Semaform is basically strip that away and say, hey, this is the news stuff. This is exactly what's objectively happening. After that, the context, all the other information, that's how I'm thinking about things. But then we'll have another segment afterwards, which is either room for disagreement, someone who says what I am, who thinks my view is complete bullshit, or we'll have a view from Hollywood or from, Cleveland, Ohio, or from London. We think that the value of that is really explaining to readers how exactly we're thinking about it, being as transparent as we possibly can with our reporting, and kind of just trying to break out of the traditional molds for stories that's existed for 100 years and really kind of lay it out for our readers and play around with different formats that allow them to know exactly how we're thinking about things and what the actual kind of objective news is. And I think it's been really interesting for me and kind of exciting, and it kind of allows me to get away with a little bit more. There are certain times where if I was trying to, you'll get a call from a spokesperson after a story publishes, you publish a traditional story, and they'll argue with you over the context of certain things. Now, for me, it's essentially, I'm not trying to hide anything from the readers. They can see, this is my view. If you disagree with it, that's completely fine, but the premise of the story itself is true. So I feel like it allows readers to engage on kind of different levels, and it's not astrophysics or anything super complicated. We're not totally game changing, but we think it really helps along the margins with letting readers know what we know and parse what's opinion from fact, and how people in different parts of the world are or different parts of the country or different parts of the industry are feeling about this thing that we've written about. So I think it's been a lot of fun.
Actively finding someone that disagrees with you, does that make you better at what you do?
I think, yeah, absolutely. It's really important for journalists to second guess and stress test everything that they're writing. It's a really dangerous zone when you talk to a lot of people who all feel the same type of way about things. It's not good for obvious reasons, and it can lead to misleading stories. I think it is good for us always to have a room for disagreement, and sometimes we don't even search for. We're not even searching for external voices. I think in this last story that I wrote a story about Spotify and their massive investment in trying to become the biggest podcast platform and producer in the world. And I think in the room for disagreement section this week, I don't even think we had a voice from someone else. It was just me disagreeing with myself, which I actually kind of enjoy as well, because I can see things from multiple perspectives, and so it's nice for me to be able to write kind of a for and against case. And just as someone who personally, I think, and most journalists feel this way, like to argue and think differently and push themselves to think about things a little bit differently. It's a really fun exercise too, to not even necessarily have a quote or something from someone else, but to actively try to disagree with yourself and draw out the other case.
I love that.
Yeah.
Looking at the media landscape at the moment it's kind of crazy in all sorts of different ways. How do you keep up with everything that's going on? How do you focus on what's important?
I've been a media reporter specifically for about 6 years. When I was on the White House team at Politico, I was still doing media reporting as well, obviously as part of the newsletter. And then also I wrote a few articles for Politico proper and for the magazine. I feel like I've been reporting on the industry for about 6 years. And, the thing that I've learned is that there are obviously going to be things that slip through the cracks. People are texting me, they'll text me about something that's going on. I'm like, what? I didn't even know, wasn't even aware of that. Yeah. And I actually think it's become a bit more challenging. There are a lot more newsletters. There are a lot more podcasts. Media has fragmented even further over the past few years, which makes it difficult to keep up with everything. I think the best thing to do, at least from my perspective, for my job, is to maintain a broad and diverse group of contacts, many of whom, a lot of the ways I get news beyond reading every newsletter that I can and subscribing to Twitter and sometimes watching some TV and listening to podcasts and, doing what everybody does and, still trying to check the home pages of various publications. It's really helpful for me to have a broad group of contacts who know that I'm interested in stuff. There was news that Vice, the company, was receiving kind of essentially a bailout from Fortress, which is one of their investors. And I hadn't seen the story, but, two people texted me, when I was at dinner, basically, sending me the article. And I don't think I would have seen it otherwise because I didn't see people tweeting about it. And I guess it would have been maybe in one of the newsletters in a few days, but it's just helpful to have contacts who in the industry who are sending me things, who know I'm interested. Yeah. So that's the best way to keep up. But frankly, it's impossible, and things are going to slip through the cracks. And I know that there are certain times I'm going to be asked about stuff, and I'm like, I just haven't been following that one as closely as I should have. So I do my best by reading and listening and watching as much as I can all day long.
Excellent. So we ask our guests always one final question of a recommendation of media that they've loved, whether it's a movie or a book or a podcast or an article. So what would you recommend for our listeners?
That's really, that's a great question. I have two things that I'm thinking about in media, both very different. I'm really looking forward to reading this new book on the Redstones, the family that owns CBS for a long time. I believe it just came out. I haven't gotten the chance to read it yet, but I've seen some of the excerpts and reviews. And it's written by two reporters from the New York Times who cover media, Jim Stewart, and then I think, is it Rachel Abrams? I know her, but I don't know if I'm butchering her last name. But they're both fantastic reporters on the media beat, and they've written what appears to be just a really juicy and interesting book about how media has changed over the past few years through the past few decades, through this kind of interesting family and juicy family drama, which, so if that's if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, if you loved Succession and something like that, it seems like this is going to be just
real world.
Oh yeah, and I can't wait. Have you gotten the chance to see any of this stuff yet?
I haven't actually. I haven't.
All right, I'll have to send you some of the excerpts because it looks fantastic. And then The other thing that I am really enjoying recently, which I'm sure I'm really late to this, but I recently started. I recently got a Letterboxd. I've been really enjoying the kind of interesting, fun community on there for reviewing movies. I feel like social media is a bit stale. I felt that kind of increasingly. I'm a bit too old for TikTok, and
Aren't we all?
yeah. Well, I feel like if you're over the age of 20, it's already
too late for you.
pushing it a little bit. And I felt, Twitter is, I feel, increasingly difficult to use, with all the changes that have been made since Elon Musk took over. The reason I like Letterboxd is because I feel like it's a small but engaged, interesting community, and I've just been discovering a lot of movies. Love to see what all my friends are watching, and I'm totally late to the game, but those are the two things happening in media that I have found to be the most enjoyable in the last few weeks.
We have just set up a self-serve ad slot in our daily newsletter, the Media Roundup, and it took me ages, so please have a look at it. If you're a subscriber, you can just click through the link on the top slot in the newsletter to book it. If you aren't a subscriber, why not? You can find out more on the newsletter tab on voices.media, or you can even book the slot directly through our Ko-Fi page, ko-fi.com/media voices. But please subscribe to our newsletter because it's great and has awesome engagement and open rates. So you need to join everybody else who's getting the top 4 media stories every day in their inbox.
But until next week, when we're going to be back with our 251st episode, unbelievably, hopefully a cheerier look at some of the more specific and tangible and practical aspects of media business models and the media world in general. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a fan of Media Voices for as long as you have been. Please do spread the word about our 250th episode. And
goodbye.